friends, in this video we are focusing on how to solve match the following questions from square root of position. So if you consider the very recent exams and if you consider the questions that were asked from this particular area, that is square root of position, you know this comes under logical reasoning, and there is a trend that we are getting questions in the form of match the following. Even though you know the basics of square root of positions, many students find it really difficult to answer the match the following questions from this square root of position. So in this session, we will be focusing on that particular concern, that is how to solve match the following questions from square root of position. So if you don't know the basics of square root of position, this video might be little difficult for you. So we have already done a video on square root of position, and the link of that particular video is available in the description box. So if you don't know the basics, or if you want to know more about square root of position or the basics of square root of position, you can just watch that video and come back, and later you can just focus on this video. If you don't know the basics, this might not work for you. So just go and watch the video on square root of position. The link is there in the description box, and after that you can just watch this one. So I have just taken a sample question. So this is how you can expect match the following questions from square root of position. So in list 1, you will be having the different propositions, and in list 2, you have the resultant propositions as well. So if you consider list 1, we have if A is true, if E is false, if I is true, and if O is false. So what you do, or what you need to do here is, you have to identify if A is universal affirmative. So if universal affirmative proposition is true, then what will be the condition of universal negative, particular affirmative, and particular negative propositions? If you have that kind of an idea only, you can answer these kinds of questions. So what we are going to do here is, we'll be taking each and every options that are given here. Let's say we'll be first taking if A is true, we'll take the condition, and we'll be focusing on if A is true, what will be the condition of E, I, and O. And then we'll be taking the next one, that is E is false. Likewise, we'll be doing all the options. So through these description or through these analysis, what we are trying to do here is how you have to think, or what is a perspective in which you have to focus on these types of questions. So if you can practice these types of questions, maybe you can just take a few questions, and if you can practice the way in which we'll be doing these questions in this particular session, then after that, this particular area will be really easy for you. If you have that kind of thought process when you're seeing these kind of match the following questions, then you can just quickly answer the questions that are coming from this one. So here you have the first one, that is A is true. So if A is true, what will be the condition of the other 3 propositions that are there in the square root of position? So I have just given the square root of position here as well. So as I have already mentioned, you just have to watch the basics of square root of position, then only you can understand what we are discussing in this particular session. So watch that video if you have not watched it, and then come back to this particular session. So if you consider square root of position, we have universal affirmative, universal negative, then we have particular affirmative and particular negative propositions given here. And basically the square root of position is a diagram that represents the relationship between these various propositions. So here the question in the match the following set, in A option, they have given us that if A is true, that is our condition. So if you consider A, that is universal affirmative, then what will be the condition of O? That is the first thing we can identify, right? Because they are contradictory. So if A is true, then O is false. Why this relationship is kind of, if one is true and one is false? Because they are contradictory, right? So if A is true, obviously O will be false. And if A is true, what will be the condition of proposition E? E is universal negative, and A and E are contrary. So what is the relationship, or what is the nature of the relationship between these 2 propositions that are named as contrary? They can be false together, but they cannot be true together. This is what we have discussed in the previous video. They can be false together, but they cannot be true together. That is what we have discussed, right? So what is the logic behind it? If we are saying that they can be false together, but they cannot be true together, they cannot be true together, that means if one is true, then the next one will be obviously false. That is what this logic is all about, right? They can be false together, but they cannot be true together. That means if one is true, the other one is obviously false. And if one is false, what will be the condition of the next one? In contrary, if one is false, the next one is undetermined. Why? They can be false together. So if one is false, the other can be false. And also there is a possibility of if one is false, the other one is becoming true. There is that possibility as well. So in that case, if A is false, then E is undetermined. E can be either true or false. But if A is true, then E will be definitely false, because in contrary, the A and E prepositions cannot be true together. That is how they are related to each other, right? And in the question they asked us to find if A is true. If A is true, then E is obviously false. Why is it so? They cannot be true together. That is the nature of their relationship. We have already discussed about that. So if that's the case, we can say that if A is true, then obviously E is false. Coming to the next preposition, that is I. So if A is true, we said that E will be definitely false, and if A is true, then O is false again. And if A is true, what is the condition of I? A and I, the relationship between universal affirmative and particular affirmative, we call it a subalternation. How are these different prepositions in subalterns are related to each other? In subalternation, what is the relationship? If universal is true, particular is true. If particular is false, universal is false. This is how we are trying to memorize, or we are trying to study or understand the relationship between the prepositions in subalternation. So if universal is true, particular will be definitely true. And if particular is false, universal will be definitely false, right? So it says that this A is true. In the question, in the first option, it says that if A is true. If A is true, definitely I will be true, right? So this is how you have to logically analyze the questions that are coming in Match the Following. So now it might look a very hectic task. We have to identify all these different relationship, and we have to find out the nature of the relationship. But the thing is, if you practice, or if you have an idea, or if you analyze these questions in this manner, and if you practice, after 2 or 3 questions, this thing will come very automatically, and you can just do it in seconds. Okay, so if you find it really difficult to answer the Match the Following question, you just sit and write these relations based on the questions and practice with 2 or 3 questions. That's enough. After that, this particular idea will come very easily for you. Okay. So if that's the case, what we can say here, if A is true, E is false, I is true, O is false. So this is the idea that you need in order to answer these questions. So coming to the question that we are discussing, if A is true, if your option, or if you have an option there, like if A is true, you don't have to consider A option in resultant prepositions, because it's given in the list 1, that the preposition that is given in the list 1 is if A is true. Then obviously the resultant will be E, I or O. You don't have to consider A preposition in the result, right? In that case, we can just eliminate these 2 options. E is false, A is undetermined, A is what we are focusing on. So you don't have to find A in the resultant preposition. So you can just eliminate these 2 options. You just have to consider these 2. So from what we have discussed, we already said that if A is true, E will be false, I will be true, O will be false. In these 2 options, we have I, O, E as well, and considering what we have determined or what we have discussed so far, we can say that if A is true, then E is false, A is false, and O will be also false. Here it says that O is undetermined, that is wrong. Okay, in that case you can just eliminate this option and you can connect option A with option 3. If A is true, E is false, O is false. Okay. to the next option, that is option B, if A is false in list 1. So what will be the condition of the other 3 propositions, or what will be the resultant propositions if E is false? So what do you mean by this E? E is basically universal negative. So if universal negative proposition is false, what will be the condition of A? A and E are basically contraries. So how are they related to each other? They can be false together, but they cannot be true together. That means if one is true, then the other will be definitely false. Why? They cannot be true together. But if one is false, the other would be undetermined. Why? If one is false, there is a possibility of having the other one is also as false, because they can be false together. They cannot be true together, but they can be false together. So if one is false, the other can be false. And also there is another chance or another possibility. If one is given as false, the other one can be true. They cannot be true together, that is there. But if one is false, the other can be true. There is nothing wrong in that kind of an analysis, right? So in this question or in this option, it says that if E is false, in the contrary relationship, then the A can be either true or false. There is 2 possibilities. If E is false, then A can be either true or false. That means A is undetermined because they are contraries. Coming to I. Okay, so E and I are contradictories. That means they cannot be true or false together. That means in contradictories, if one is false and the question is given as E is false, then the other one will be definitely true because they are contradictories. The relationship between contradictories is in such a way that they cannot be both true or false together. So it says that if E is false, then obviously I will be true because they are contradictories. Then coming to the next proposition, that is O. If E is false, what will be the condition of O? What will be the condition of O if E is false? If you consider this E and O here, the relationship is named as subordination. And what we have discussed in the previous question also, we said that in subordination, if the universal is true, particular will be true. And if the particular is false, universal will be false. In other words, if universal is true, particular is also true. But if the universal is false, particular will be undetermined. Likewise, if the particular is false, then the universal will be false. But if the particular is true, universal will be undetermined. This is a relationship between subordination. So if you find it difficult, just watch the basics of square of opposition and just write down what I am saying and then analyze it. Then you will get this idea. Okay, so it says that if E is false, E is a universal statement, and if E is false, or it's a universal proposition. So if E is false, what will be the condition of O? In subordination, if universal is true, then particular will be definitely true. If universal is false, then particular will be undetermined. So you got the idea, right? So coming back to the question that is given here. From what we have analyzed so far, we can say that if E is false, I is true, I is true, and O is undetermined. So the right option that you can match with option B is option 1, that is I is true, O is undetermined. Taking the next option, that is if I is true. So which one is I? This is I, particular, affirmative. So if I is true, what will be the condition of A? So this A and I are in a relationship which can be termed as subordination. And what is the relationship, or what is the nature of the relationship between the subordination in general? We have A and I and E and O are subordinations. So if you consider this relationship, we can say that if the universal is true, particular is true. If the universal is false, particular is undetermined. Likewise, if the particular is false, universal will be false. If the particular is true, then universal will be undetermined. In that way, we can say that if I is true, then A will be undetermined, because the particular, if particular is true, then the universal will be undetermined. If the particular is false, then you can say that the universal will be false itself. Okay, in that case, we can say that if I is true, A is undetermined. Coming to the next relationship, that is E. A and E are contrary. Sorry, not like A and E, it's like I and E, because we are focusing on the preposition, that is if I is true, right? So we have I here and then we have E here. So what is the relationship between I and E? They are contradictories. What do you mean by this contradictories, or what is the nature of relationship between the prepositions that are coming under contradictories? They cannot be both true or false together. That means if I is true, then obviously or definitely E will be false. This is how they are related to each other. They are contradictory. So if I is true, then definitely E will be false. Next one, O. So considering I and O, they are subcontraries, right? They are subcontraries. So what is the relationship, or what is the nature of the relationship between I and O, or the subcontraries in general? They can be true together, but they cannot be false together. So that is the nature of relationship between I and O, that are subcontraries. So they can be true together, but they cannot be false together. What do you mean by that? They cannot be false together. That means if I is false, then O will be definitely true, because they cannot be false together. And the other case, if I is true, what will be the condition? If I is true, then this O can be either true or false. That is the connection between these two. That means if I is true, then O is undetermined, because if I is true, O can be either true or false. So that's why we call it as undetermined. So if I is true, we can say that O will be undetermined. Taking what we have discussed here, we can say that if I is true, we can connect that with option 2. E is false, yeah, E is false, and A is undetermined. A is undetermined. Alright, taking the last option, that is if O is false. What is O here? O is particular negative, right? O is particular negative. So in the question it says that if O is false, then we have to identify if O is false, then what is the condition of the other three prepositions that are there in the square of opposition. So if O is false, first consider A, preposition A. So A and O are basically contradictories. Basically they are contradictories. That means they cannot be both true or false together. That means if O is false, then A will be definitely true. They cannot be true or false together. If O is false, A will be true. If O is true, A will be false. That is how they are related to each other. In that way, we can say that if O is false, then definitely A will be true. Then the next one is O and E. Okay, O and E, they are connected in such a way that the relationship is titled as subordination. So in that case, we can say that if O is false, then E will be definitely false. If O is true, then E will be undetermined. Likewise, if E is true, O will be true. If E is false, O will be undetermined. We have already discussed about this thing in several times in the previous questions. So in that case, in the question it says that if O is false. So if O is false, then E will be false, right? That is the relationship between these two prepositions, and they are called as subordination. So subordination and subaltern relationship is basically, we can define it as if universal is true, particular is true. If universal is false, particular is undetermined. If particular is false, universal is false. If particular is true, universal is undetermined. But in this case, it says that the particular or the O preposition here is false. In that case, we can say that E is again false. The next relationship is O and I. O and I are basically subcontraries. So what is the relationship between, or what is the nature of the relationship between these two? They can be true together, but they cannot be false together. They can be true together, but they cannot be false together. That means if one among these prepositions is false, then the other one will be definitely true. Why? They cannot be false together. That is how they are related to each other. If one is true in subcontrary, the other will be undetermined. If one is true, then the other will be either true or false. But if one of the prepositions in subcontrary is false, then the other one will be definitely true, because they cannot be false together. They can be true together, there is nothing wrong in that, but they cannot be false together. In that case, if O is false, then definitely I will be true. Taking these ideas to the question that we are discussing, if O is false, then A is true, yeah, A is true, and I is again true. So that is option for. So what I do here, or what is the idea that is behind these massive following questions? If you know thoroughly the relationship between the various prepositions and square of a position, then this massive following question is a very easy thing for you. But if you don't know this idea of square of a position very well, then it might be really difficult for you to identify the correct matches. So what I need to do here is, first and foremost, have a proper idea about the basics of square of a position questions, how or what are the different terms in square of a position, or how these different prepositions are connected to each other, what is the nature of their relationship. That idea is very, very important. That is very important. And also you need to identify and you need to practice these kinds of questions. Even though you know the basics of match the following, or the basics of square of a position, even though you know that, you need to practice these kinds of match the following questions. So I have just shown you how, or what is the perspective behind these match the following question is what we have discussed so far. So if you're finding it really difficult, if you're finding this match the following questions really difficult, then just take a few sample questions, match the following questions, and just work on it as we have done here. Just write, if A is true, what will be the condition of the other three? And if E is false, what is the condition of the other three prepositions? Likewise, you just write it down, just practice it, just take 2 or 3 questions, and after that, this will be really easy. You don't need to write all these things in your exams if you're practicing it really well here in your practice session. So, just take practice questions and just focus on these questions and do what we have done in this video and try to answer the questions. And after that, after a few questions, you will be just getting it in few seconds. Okay, so if that's the case, we have identified all the sets, and from that we can say that A is 3, B is 1, C is 2 and D is 4. So the right answer for this question is option C itself. So in this session, we have dealt with a very common concern among a lot of NET aspirants, that is how to solve this match the following questions from square of a position. And also if you find, or if you consider the very recent exams, this is a trend as well. They are asking a lot of match the following questions from square of a position. So if you don't know the basics of square of a position, this type of question might look really difficult for you. So that is what we have addressed. That concern is what we have addressed in this particular session. So I think now you got an idea about how to study or how to learn this kind of match the following questions. What is the perspective that you need to have when you're solving these questions? So if you find it difficult, just watch this video once more and just try practicing questions. That is a basic thing. That is the most important thing. Just take a few sample questions, sample match the following questions, and just practice it. And that's it. Then you can easily answer these questions. So if you really need this kind of a very systematic, strategic approach to your NET exam, then Appleby will be a very good solution for you. We have online and offline classes available here. So if you'd like to know more about our courses, you can just contact the number that is given here in the description box. So thanks for watching and happy learning.